You know that feeling when you're so overwhelmed by the fear of what other people think that it just feels easier to, well, to disappear? To want connection more than anything, but you feel completely paralyzed? Like you can't reach out or even set the simplest boundary? Well, let's get into it, because that exact feeling is right at the heart of the personal story we're going to explore today.
So let's meet the person at the center of this story. She's a 28-year-old woman, fresh out of school, and she's just landed her first real job. On the outside, it looks like she's ticking all the right boxes, but inside, she is really struggling. She feels totally overwhelmed at work, sometimes bursting into tears, and she's being haunted by a relationship that didn't work out. And this quote from her case study says it all, right? There's this disconnect between her quiet, anxious exterior and the storm she's feeling inside, a storm she's finally ready to talk about.
And her struggle, it isn't just about being shy. No, it's something much deeper. It's like she's living behind this invisible wall. On one side of the wall is this deep human need for friendship, for love, for acceptance. But on the other side, there's this terrifying, overwhelming fear of being criticized or rejected. So in this explainer, we're going to try and understand that wall, and maybe, just maybe, find some ways to start taking it down, brick by brick.
Okay, so now that we kind of have a feel for the experience, let's actually give it a name. Because this isn't just a bad mood or some phase she's going through, it's a recognized pattern of behavior and inner experience. So let's take a look at the clinical definition to really get what's going on behind that invisible wall.
This is Avoidant Personality Disorder, or AVPD for short. And the key words here are pervasive pattern. This isn't just about feeling a little nervous before you go to a party. This is a long-term, deeply ingrained way of seeing the world that impacts everything: your job, your relationships, how you feel about yourself. It's a formal diagnosis, and it's part of a group of conditions that we call personality disorders. And this just lays out the central, incredibly painful paradox of AVPD so perfectly. Just look at these two columns. On the left, everything a person with AVPD wants so badly: companionship, intimacy, acceptance. But on the right, you see the intense fear that just slams the door shut. It's not that they don't want relationships, it's that the perceived risk of being ridiculed or rejected feels absolutely catastrophic.
So how does this actually show up in someone's life? Well, the official diagnostic manual gives us a pretty clear picture. To be diagnosed, a person has to show at least 4 of these persistent patterns. And just think about it for a second. Avoiding a job that requires a lot of interaction, that could mean turning down your dream promotion. Or being unwilling to get close to someone unless you're 100% certain they like you. You could miss out on a real chance for connection. It becomes a life built around avoiding any potential for shame or criticism.
Now, to get a little clinical for a moment, AVPD is categorized as a cluster C personality disorder. The easiest way to think about this is like a genre of music. You know how rock music has a bunch of different subgenres? Well, cluster C is a category for personality disorders that all share this core theme of anxiety and fear. It's really just the clinical way of saying that this condition is fundamentally rooted in an anxious way of experiencing the world. And this brings us to a really important question. It's one that causes a ton of confusion. Is this just a really severe form of social anxiety, or is it something else entirely? Let's dig into what the research tells us. Okay, now what's so interesting about this slide is how it breaks down the difference with numbers. Researchers looked at how much of each condition is tied to these really deep-seated personality traits, things like a tendency to withdraw or to feel intense negative emotions. For social anxiety disorder, it was 29%. But for AVPD, look at that jump all the way to 54%. So the big takeaway here is that while they might look similar on the surface, AVPD seems to be woven much more deeply into a person's core personality, into their fundamental wiring. So if it's that deeply rooted, can things actually change? Is it possible? Well, let's find out by going back to our case study. Because we're about to explore a really powerful idea from her therapy, the idea that we can actually change the story we tell ourselves about our own lives.
So the building blocks of this inner story, it's called narrative identity, and there are 3 key pieces. First, there's agency. That's the feeling that you are the author of your own life, not just some side character. Then there's communion. That's seeing your life as a story of connection with other people. And finally, coherence. Just being able to tell your own story in a way that makes sense, both to your head and your heart.
And would you look at what happened to her sense of agency through therapy? This chart shows a massive shift. She went from telling stories where she was completely powerless, just at the mercy of whatever happened to her, to telling stories where she was the one making the decisions, she was the one creating change, and taking control of her own plot. But here is where it gets really interesting, a bit of a twist. As her agency shot up, her sense of communion fulfillment, so how satisfying her relationships felt, it actually went down. And that's fascinating, right? It's not because she wanted connection any less. It's because with this new sense of agency, she started to realize just how unfulfilling and one-sided her old relationships had actually been. She was finally waking up to what she needed.
And this quote, this is just such a brilliant illustration of that newfound agency in action. This is her, speaking to a partner, setting a crystal clear boundary. She's not just quietly accepting bad treatment anymore just to avoid being rejected. No, she is defining the terms of her own relationships. This is what rewriting your inner story looks like in the real world.
Her story is just incredibly hopeful. But what does the bigger picture look like for managing AVPD? Let's take a step back for a second and look at the clinical realities and the best path forward.
It's really important to be realistic here. The research shows that a complete cure for AVPD is pretty uncommon, and there aren't any specific medications approved for it. So the crucial takeaway is this: the goal of treatment isn't always to completely erase the disorder, but to manage it. It's about reducing that interpersonal stress, stabilizing things, and just significantly improving a person's quality of life. And honestly, that is a powerful and totally achievable goal.
And, there's also a lot of hope in how the science itself is changing. The whole field is moving away from these rigid boxes like cluster C. Instead of thinking about personality disorders as an on or off switch, this new dimensional model sees them more like dimmer switches. It gives us a much more personalized way of understanding where someone falls on a spectrum of different traits, and that could lead to way more tailored and effective treatments down the line.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thought. We've talked about a clinical diagnosis and therapeutic change, but at the end of the day, this is a human story about the desire to connect. And it leads to a much bigger question, not just for doctors, but for all of us. How can we, in our own lives, create more space, more safety for the people who want nothing more than to connect with us, but are trapped behind that invisible but very, very real wall of fear?